A crowded courtroom falls silent as a little girl takes the stand, her eyes locked on the prosecutor. Then, with a trembling finger, she points directly at him and says 4 words that leave the jury stunned and gasping for air. What did she say? What secret could bring a powerful man to his knees? The truth is more shocking than you can imagine. Tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, the kind of low, tense whispers that felt heavier than silence. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators leaning forward, their eyes darting between the little girl clutching a stuffed rabbit and the man sitting calmly at the prosecutor's table. Lucy, small for her age, sat beside her attorney, her wide eyes scanning the room. She was still, almost too still, as if holding her breath. Emma adjusted her glasses, her jaw tight with determination. She glanced down at Lucy and whispered, "You ready?" Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that promised protection. Lucy looked up at her, her grip tightening on the rabbit. For a moment she didn't respond, and Emma wondered if the child would freeze. Then, with a small nod, Lucy whispered back, "I'll try." Across the room, Nathan Hale leaned back in his chair, the faintest hint of a smirk playing on his lips. He was confident, untouchable even. His tailored suit seemed to fit him like a shield, a symbol of his power. The audience watched him, not just with curiosity, but also with a faint trace of unease, as if sensing something about him that didn't sit right. He caught Lucy's glance and held it for just a second, his eyes cold and calculating. Lucy looked away quickly, her hand trembling slightly as she tucked the rabbit closer. The judge called the room to order, his gavel echoing like a hammer driving tension into the walls. "This court will now proceed with the testimony of the witness, Lucy Taylor." His deep voice was steady, but even he seemed to feel the gravity of the moment. A child on the witness stand wasn't common, especially not in a case like this. A case where the accused wasn't the one on trial. Not yet. Emma stood, smoothing the front of her blazer. She walked Lucy to the stand, each step measured and deliberate, as if trying to transfer her own steadiness to the girl beside her. Lucy climbed into the chair with some difficulty, her small hands gripping the edges as she perched on the seat. Her legs swung slightly, unable to reach the floor. Emma began with the basics, her tone calm and reassuring. "Lucy, can you tell us your full name and how old you are?" "Lucy Ann Taylor," the girl replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm 9. Emma nodded, smiling gently. "Thank you, Lucy. I know this is hard, but I want you to remember you're safe here. You don't have to be afraid. Can you do that for me?" Lucy's lips pressed into a thin line. Her fingers fidgeted with the rabbit's worn ear, but she gave another small nod. Emma took a step back, allowing the room to breathe for a moment. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes on Lucy, waiting, judging. "Lucy, I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened to your mom. Is that okay?" Lucy's head tilted downward, but she didn't speak. Emma waited, letting the silence stretch just long enough to give Lucy the space to answer. Finally, in a voice so soft it barely carried across the room, she said, "Okay." Across the room, Nathan shifted in his seat. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Emma caught it. She saw the flicker of tension in his jaw as Lucy's gaze darted toward him and then back to Emma. A bead of sweat rolled down the side of Nathan's temple, though he wiped it away quickly. "Lucy," Emma said carefully, "can you tell us what you remember about that night? The night your mom got hurt?" The air in the room grew heavy. Lucy's fingers stilled on the rabbit's ear, and her small chest rose and fell as she took a deep breath. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowing as if she were trying to pluck memories from a dark and tangled web. "I was in my room," she began, her voice trembling. "I heard her scream." A murmur rippled through the room before the judge's gavel silenced it. Emma crouched slightly, her voice even softer now. "Take your time, Lucy. What happened after that?" Lucy opened her eyes, and for a moment they glistened with tears that she quickly blinked away. I ran to the hallway. I saw her on the floor. Her voice broke on the last word, but she pushed forward. He was standing over her. He had something in his hand. Emma's heart ached as she watched the girl struggle with her memories. Did you see his face, Lucy? Lucy shook her head, her lips trembling. He wore a mask. Nathan exhaled slowly, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been relief. But Emma wasn't finished. What else do you remember, Lucy? Anything at all? The girl hesitated. Her fingers moved back to the rabbit, tracing its fabric as if seeking comfort. Then she said, "He wore a watch. It was shiny. It had a big, round face." Emma froze for a moment, her mind racing. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Nathan's eyes darted to his wrist instinctively before he caught himself, folding his hands in his lap. Emma straightened, her voice gaining strength. "Lucy, are you sure about the watch?" Lucy nodded, her small voice growing firmer. "Yes, I remember. It was shiny, and it had numbers all around it." In the back of the courtroom, a woman gasped audibly, and the judge's gavel came down again. Nathan sat rigid now, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. His smirk was gone. Emma stepped closer to Lucy, her gaze steady. "Lucy, you're doing so well. One more question. Do you see the man who wore that watch in this room today?" Lucy's eyes shifted slowly across the courtroom. They landed on Nathan. Her small hand rose, trembling but certain, and she pointed directly at him. The room erupted, voices rising in a cacophony of disbelief and shock. Lucy's voice cut through the chaos, clear and strong, as she said the words that made the jury gasp. "It was him." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and the sound of shuffling papers filled the air as the judge hammered his gavel repeatedly, shouting, "Order! Order in the court!" It took several tense moments for the room to settle, but the shock lingered, hanging thick like a storm cloud. Nathan Hale didn't flinch, though a muscle in his jaw twitched as he leaned forward. He folded his hands on the table, his face a careful mask of calm. But Emma saw the faint crack, a flicker of panic in his sharp, dark eyes. She had been watching him for weeks, studying every movement, every calculated word. Today, his composure faltered. Lucy sat still in the witness chair, her finger still pointed at Nathan. Slowly, she lowered her hand and tightened her hold on the rabbit. Her small chest heaved as she fought to steady her breathing. Emma took a step closer to her, giving the girl a reassuring look before turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma began, her voice cutting through the tension, "you just heard this child identify the man she saw connected to the attack on her mother. This isn't a coincidence. It's the truth. Lucy remembers the details, even those that no one else could have known." She gestured toward Nathan, her eyes narrowing. "And she recognized him." Nathan's defense attorney, an older man with a gruff demeanor, stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor," he barked. "The witness is a child. Her testimony is unreliable. And this line of questioning is speculative at best." The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression stern. "Overruled. The jury will consider the credibility of the testimony. Proceed, Ms. Carter." Emma nodded, her shoulders straightening. She turned back to Lucy, her tone softening. "Lucy, you said you saw a watch. Can you describe it again?" Lucy nodded hesitantly. "It was silver. It had a leather strap. The face was really shiny, like it was new." Emma approached the evidence table, picking up a photograph that had been submitted earlier in the case. She held it up for the court to see. "Lucy, is this the watch you saw that night?" Lucy's eyes widened slightly as she studied the image. Her hand gripped the rabbit tighter, but she nodded slowly. "Yes, that's the one." Emma walked over to the jury, displaying the photo to them one by one. "This watch was confiscated from the defendant, Nathan Hale, just last month. It matches Lucy's description exactly." Nathan's defense attorney shot to his feet again. "Objection. This evidence is circumstantial. There's no direct link between the watch and the crime." Emma spun around to face him, her voice sharp. "The direct link is sitting right there in that chair. This little girl saw him wearing that watch the night her mother was attacked. The judge lifted a hand. Sustained. Ms. Carter, keep your arguments within bounds. Emma inhaled deeply, reining in her frustration. She turned back to Lucy, crouching slightly to meet the girl's eye level. Lucy, do you remember anything else about that night? Anything at all? The girl hesitated. Her gaze flicked to Nathan briefly before returning to Emma. He said something, she murmured. Emma's heart raced. What did he say? Lucy's voice dropped to a whisper, her words trembling. He said, "No one will find out." The room gasped again, and Nathan's calm facade cracked completely. His lips pressed into a thin line, his fists clenching on the table. Emma seized the moment, turning to the judge. Your Honor, Lucy's testimony and her identification of Nathan Hale make it clear that he is not just a prosecutor in this trial. He's a participant in the crime. The judge frowned deeply, looking between Emma, Nathan, and Lucy. Ms. Carter, I trust you have more than this testimony to substantiate your claim. Emma straightened. I do, Your Honor. But Lucy's bravery today is the cornerstone of this case. She's the one who saw the truth when no one else would. The judge nodded, but his stern expression remained. We'll take a recess. The court will reconvene in 30 minutes. The gavel struck, and the judge stood, dismissing the court for the break. The spectators filed out slowly, whispering to one another, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. Emma turned to Lucy, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did so well, she said softly. I'm so proud of you. Lucy looked up at her, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. Is it over now? Emma crouched down, meeting her gaze directly. Not yet, but you were so brave, Lucy. What you did today, it's going to make all the difference. Lucy nodded, her grip on the rabbit loosening just slightly. Across the room, Nathan was still seated, his attorney whispering furiously in his ear. He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on Lucy, his expression unreadable. Emma stood and guided Lucy back to her seat, her mind racing. She knew the case wasn't over, not yet, but the truth was beginning to break through, and she wasn't going to stop until it shattered Nathan's carefully constructed world. As the courtroom cleared for recess, Emma led Lucy to a quiet corner outside the bustling hallway, away from prying eyes and murmured conversations. The little girl clung to her stuffed rabbit, her face pale but determined. Emma knelt to meet Lucy's gaze, her tone gentle but firm. You're doing amazing, Lucy. I know how hard this is for you, but you're stronger than you realize. Lucy nodded slightly but didn't speak. Her small hand brushed over the rabbit's tattered ear as if searching for comfort. Emma recognized the fatigue in her eyes, a child carrying a burden far too heavy for her age. Do you want some water? Emma asked softly, trying to ease the tension. Lucy shook her head, her voice barely audible. I'm okay. Emma hesitated, then reached out and placed a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. Good, because this isn't over. I'll need you to stay strong for just a little longer, okay? We're getting closer. Before Lucy could respond, Emma noticed a shadow approaching. She turned sharply to see Nathan Hale standing just a few feet away, his attorney trailing behind him with a clipboard and a disapproving scowl. Nathan's presence was electric, the kind of energy that made people uncomfortable without fully understanding why. His smile was tight, his polished exterior still intact, but his eyes betrayed him. There was fury simmering just beneath the surface. I'd like a word with Ms. Taylor, Nathan said smoothly, his voice dripping with false civility. His gaze flicked toward Lucy, who instinctively shrank behind Emma. Of course, in the presence of her attorney. Emma straightened, placing herself firmly between Nathan and Lucy. Absolutely not. You've already said enough. Nathan's smile tightened further, his calm demeanor slipping. I wasn't aware protecting witnesses included hiding them from professional courtesy. Emma's voice dropped, cold and cutting. Courtesy? Is that what you call threatening a child? Nathan's attorney interjected quickly, his voice low and cautious. Let's not throw around baseless accusations, Ms. Carter. I'm sure you wouldn't want to risk jeopardizing your own credibility. Emma stepped forward, her presence towering despite Nathan's taller frame. I have a brave little girl here who just identified you as part of a crime. Maybe focus less on credibility and more on finding a new watch. Nathan's jaw tightened, his facade cracking further. He opened his mouth to respond, but Lucy's small voice broke through before he could speak. You lied, she said, stepping out from behind Emma. Her hands trembled, but her voice was clear. You said no one would find out, but I did. For a moment, even Nathan seemed caught off guard. His smile vanished entirely, replaced by a hard, calculating glare. You think you understand what you saw? He said, his tone low and dangerous. You're just a... That's enough, Emma snapped, her voice echoing in the hallway. She turned to the courtroom deputies nearby who were already watching the exchange with suspicion. This is harassment. I suggest you escort Mr. Hale back to his seat before he does something else to incriminate himself. Nathan's attorney quickly pulled him back, muttering something under his breath. Nathan allowed himself to be led away, but not before casting one final look at Lucy. His eyes were cold and unyielding, a silent promise that this wasn't over. Emma knelt beside Lucy again, her voice softening as the tension dissipated. Are you okay? Lucy nodded, but her voice wavered as she whispered, He's scary. Emma's heart ached for her. She placed both hands on Lucy's shoulders and said firmly, I know he is, but he can't hurt you anymore. I won't let him. You've already done more than anyone thought possible. Lucy hesitated, then leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Emma's neck. The hug was quick but fierce, and Emma felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a fight for Lucy's future, and Emma wasn't going to lose. As they walked back toward the courtroom, Emma's mind churned. Nathan was rattled, but she needed more. Lucy's testimony was powerful, but it wouldn't be enough to break a man like Nathan Hale. She needed something concrete, something undeniable. And then she remembered Lucy's rabbit. The stuffed toy had been with Lucy every step of the way, an ever-present comfort in a sea of uncertainty. Emma's thoughts raced as she recalled Lucy's earlier words. He said, no one will find out. How had Lucy remembered that so clearly? Was it just a vivid memory, or was there something else? Emma glanced down at the rabbit in Lucy's hands. Lucy, she said gently, can I see your rabbit for a moment? Lucy looked up at her, confused but trusting. She handed over the toy, watching as Emma turned it over carefully. It was well loved, with patches of worn fabric and a few loose stitches. But something about it caught Emma's attention, a faint bulge beneath one of its seams, almost imperceptible. Lucy, Emma said slowly, her heart beginning to race. Did your mom ever do anything special to your rabbit? Did she ever hide something in it? Lucy frowned, her brow furrowing in thought. She fixed it once. She said it was a secret. She told me to keep it with me, always. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she inspected the stitching more closely. If there was a recording, a hidden piece of evidence, it could change everything. We need to have this checked out, Emma said, her voice urgent. She glanced back toward the courtroom doors. Time was running out, but she could feel it. She was on the brink of something big, something that could expose Nathan Hale for everything he was. And this time, he wouldn't see it coming. Emma's heart raced as she guided Lucy back into the courtroom. Her mind was fixated on the stuffed rabbit clutched in her hand, the faint bulge beneath the seam now a glimmer of hope. Could this small toy hold the key to unraveling everything Nathan Hale had worked so hard to hide? She couldn't afford to wait to find out. Stay here, Lucy, Emma said softly, seating the girl at the defense table. I need to check something quickly. Lucy nodded, her small face lined with exhaustion but trust shining in her eyes. Emma handed the rabbit to a courtroom deputy, her voice low but firm. I need this examined immediately. The seam feels off. It might contain something important. The deputy hesitated, then nodded, understanding the urgency in her tone. He disappeared through a side door, leaving Emma to return to the defense table. She glanced toward Nathan, who sat stiffly at the prosecutor's table, his knuckles white as he gripped a pen. He hadn't looked at her since their confrontation in the hallway, but she could feel his tension radiating across the room. The judge re-entered, his robes sweeping the floor as he took his seat. "Court is back in session," he announced, his voice steady and commanding. "Ms. Carter, you may proceed." Emma rose, her movements purposeful. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to continue questioning the witness." Lucy was called back to the stand, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing chair. She sat straighter this time, her hands resting on her lap. Emma noticed the flicker of determination in her expression, a spark of resilience that hadn't been there before. "Lucy," Emma began gently, "you mentioned earlier that the man who hurt your mom said something that night. Can you repeat what he said, just one more time, for the court?" Lucy's voice was soft but steady. He said, "No one will find out." The jury shifted in their seats, the weight of her words settling over them. Emma nodded, pacing slowly before turning back to Lucy. "Did your mom ever tell you anything important about that night? Maybe something she wanted you to remember?" Lucy's brow furrowed as she thought. "She said I had to be brave. She said if something happened, the rabbit would help me." Emma stilled, her heart pounding. Her instincts had been right. The rabbit wasn't just a comfort object, it was a lifeline. "Thank you, Lucy," Emma said softly. She glanced toward the side door, silently willing the deputy to return with answers. She needed to stall, to keep Nathan in his seat, and the jury's attention locked on Lucy's testimony. Across the room, Nathan shifted uncomfortably. His attorney leaned in, whispering something, but Nathan didn't respond. His gaze flicked to Lucy, then to Emma, his jaw tightening. He was unraveling, and Emma wasn't about to let him regain control. "Your Honor," Nathan's attorney interjected, standing abruptly, "this line of questioning is speculative at best, unless the defense has tangible evidence to support these claims." The door to the courtroom opened, cutting him off. The deputy reappeared, holding the rabbit carefully in his hands. He approached the judge, whispering something that caused the older man's eyes to widen slightly. The judge turned to Emma. "Ms. Carter, please approach." Emma hurried to the bench, her heart in her throat. The deputy handed her a small object, a tiny recording device, carefully concealed within the rabbit's seam. Emma's breath hitched as she realized what it meant. If there was audio on the device, it could corroborate Lucy's testimony in ways no cross-examination ever could. "Your Honor," Emma said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "This is a recording device that was hidden inside the witness's stuffed rabbit. I request permission to play the contents for the court." Nathan shot to his feet, his face pale. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense is introducing evidence without prior disclosure." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. We will hear the recording." Emma returned to her table, carefully plugging the device into the court's audio system. The room was silent, the tension almost unbearable as the device began to play. At first, there was static. Then, a woman's voice emerged, calm, but tinged with fear. "Lucy, baby, stay in your room. Don't come out no matter what you hear, okay? Mommy's going to take care of it." Emma glanced at Lucy, whose eyes filled with tears at the sound of her mother's voice. The recording continued, capturing muffled sounds of movement, a man's voice speaking low and threatening. "You shouldn't have done that," the man said, his tone icy. "No one will find out." The jury collectively froze, their eyes widening in shock. Emma's gaze flicked to Nathan, whose face was ashen. The voice was unmistakable. It was his. The recording ended with the sound of a struggle, a muffled scream, and then silence. Emma looked back at the judge, her voice steady but fierce. "Your Honor, this recording proves two things: that Nathan Hale was present at the scene of the crime, and that he threatened the victim to cover his involvement. I move to have Mr. Hale formally investigated for his role in this attack." The courtroom erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as the reality of the evidence sank in. Nathan stood, his hands shaking as he pointed toward Emma. "This is a setup," he shouted, his composure completely shattered. "You can't prove any of this." The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Order in the court, order!" He turned to the bailiff. "Take Mr. Hale into custody for questioning. This court is adjourned." As the bailiff approached Nathan, he resisted for a moment, his movements frantic. But he couldn't escape the weight of the evidence, or the judgment in the eyes of everyone around him. Emma turned to Lucy, kneeling beside her as the chaos unfolded. "You did it," she whispered. "You were brave, just like your mom asked you to be." Lucy didn't speak, but her small hand reached for Emma's, squeezing tightly. For the first time, her grip was steady. As Nathan Hale was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the silence that followed was deafening. The once confident prosecutor was now a broken man, his head lowered as murmurs rippled through the crowd. The jury, still seated, exchanged stunned glances, their earlier doubt about Lucy's testimony now replaced with undeniable certainty. The recording had sealed the truth in a way no argument could undo. Emma stayed crouched beside Lucy, her hands still clasping the girl's. "It's over," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of relief that she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. "You were amazing, Lucy. You stood up to him and you made the truth known." Lucy blinked up at her, her wide eyes still wet with tears. "He's not going to hurt anyone else now, is he?" she asked, her voice trembling but resolute. Emma shook her head firmly. "Number, he won't. You made sure of that." The judge stood, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this court recognizes the introduction of significant new evidence. We will reconvene tomorrow for further proceedings regarding the defendant's role in these allegations. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck and the room exhaled collectively. Spectators began filing out, some whispering about the scandal that had just unfolded. Reporters scrambled to get statements, cameras flashing outside the doors. The courtroom that had been a stage for Nathan's power for so long was now his undoing, and everyone knew it. Emma turned to Lucy, her voice calm but urgent. "Come on, let's get out of here before the press gets to us." She stood, taking Lucy's hand and leading her through a side exit. The little girl followed silently, her rabbit tucked tightly under her arm. Outside, the air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension of the courtroom. Emma knelt beside Lucy, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Lucy hesitated before answering. "I'm okay, but I miss my mom." Emma's chest tightened at the quiet admission. "I know," she said softly, "and I know she'd be so proud of you. What you did today, it was brave, braver than most people ever have to be." Lucy didn't respond, but she leaned into Emma's side, the gesture speaking louder than words. Emma wrapped an arm around her, giving her a moment of comfort before standing. "We need to talk to the police," Emma said. "The recording is going to lead to a full investigation, and they'll need to know everything you remember. Do you think you can do that?" Lucy nodded slowly, her grip on the rabbit tightening. "I can do it." "That's my girl," Emma said with a small smile. She pulled out her phone and called the lead detective on the case, arranging to meet at the precinct. As she hung up, she glanced at Lucy again, marveling at the strength the little girl had shown. At the precinct, Detective Rivera met them with a grim but determined expression. He was a tall man with a weathered face, his demeanor one of quiet authority. "Ms. Carter," he said, nodding in greeting, "and you must be Lucy." Lucy gave a small wave, her eyes wary but curious. Rivera crouched slightly, his tone softening. "You've been through a lot, haven't you? I just want you to know you're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." Lucy studied him for a moment before nodding. "Thank you." Rivera straightened, turning to Emma. "The recording was a game changer. We've already started looking into Nathan Hale's connections. If there's more to this, we'll find it." "There's more," Emma said confidently. "He's been covering his tracks for years. Lucy's mom was just the first person brave enough to stand up to him, and Lucy was the one who made sure her voice was heard. Rivera nodded, his jaw tightening. We'll need Lucy's full statement to build the case, but I can already tell you this. Hale isn't walking away from this one. Later that evening, Emma and Lucy sat together in Emma's small apartment. The day had been long, and the weight of it all was finally settling in. Lucy sat curled up on the couch, the rabbit still in her arms, while Emma handed her a mug of hot cocoa. You know, Emma said, sitting beside her, I lost someone once because of Nathan Hale. Lucy looked up, her eyes wide. You did? Emma nodded. My brother. He was innocent, but Nathan made sure the evidence told a different story. I wasn't a lawyer back then, but I promised myself I'd do whatever it took to make sure no one else had to go through that. Lucy's gaze softened, her small voice breaking the silence. You kept your promise. Emma smiled, her throat tight with emotion. I guess I did, but only because of you, Lucy. You're the real hero here. Lucy blinked, her face lighting up with a small, shy smile. For the first time since Emma had met her, there was a hint of peace in the little girl's eyes. As the evening wore on, the two sat together, the weight of the day slowly giving way to a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had faced a monster and won, not just for themselves, but for the memory of Lucy's mom and everyone else who had suffered in silence. The fight wasn't over, but for now they had earned a moment of rest. And in that moment, Emma felt hope. The following morning dawned gray and overcast, the heavy clouds mirroring the somber atmosphere as Emma and Lucy arrived back at the courthouse. Reporters swarmed the steps, their voices blending into a chaotic hum of questions and accusations aimed at anyone entering or leaving the building. Emma tightened her grip on Lucy's hand, guiding her through the throng with quiet determination. Ms. Carter, is it true Nathan Hale has been detained? Lucy, how did you feel identifying him in court? Does this mean Hale's career is over? Emma ignored the questions, shielding Lucy from the flashing cameras as they pushed inside. The sanctuary of the courthouse offered some relief, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed on Emma's shoulders. Today wasn't just about Lucy's bravery, it was about ensuring that Nathan Hale's web of lies unraveled completely. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The jury filed in, their expressions serious, their earlier skepticism replaced by unease. They had heard the recording, seen the fear in Lucy's eyes, and now they awaited the next piece of the puzzle. Nathan Hale entered moments later, flanked by two officers. His suit, though still impeccable, seemed less a mark of authority and more a hollow shell. His face was pale, his confident smirk long gone. The whispers in the gallery grew louder as he took his seat, his attorney leaning in to whisper furiously. Nathan didn't respond, his gaze fixed ahead, his jaw clenched. Emma sat beside Lucy at the defense table, leaning close to the little girl. How are you feeling? She asked softly. Lucy hesitated, her fingers gripping the rabbit in her lap. Nervous, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma smiled gently. That's okay. You've already done the hardest part. Just remember, you're not alone. I'm right here with you. Lucy nodded, her small shoulders straightening slightly. Emma felt a surge of pride. Despite everything, this little girl was standing tall. The proceedings began with Emma introducing new evidence that had surfaced overnight. The recording device from the rabbit had not only captured Nathan's threatening words, but also revealed faint background noises, specific sounds that investigators had traced to a nearby construction site. This placed Nathan at the scene of the attack on the night it occurred. Detective Rivera was called to the stand to testify. His voice was steady as he described how the recording had been analyzed, leading his team to uncover additional connections between Nathan Hale and other questionable cases. His words painted a picture of a man who had wielded his power not to seek justice but to manipulate it. Mr. Hale ensured evidence was tampered with, Rivera stated, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. He pressured witnesses, falsified reports, and used his influence to silence anyone who stood in his way. The jury leaned forward in their seats, their expressions a mixture of shock and anger. Nathan's attorney attempted to dismiss Rivera's testimony as speculative, but the detective's confidence left little room for doubt. As the evidence mounted, Emma knew it was time to call Lucy back to the stand. She turned to the little girl, her voice low. "Lucy, are you ready?" Lucy hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I'm ready." Emma led her to the stand, helping her settle into the chair. Lucy's small figure seemed almost lost among the imposing furniture, but her eyes shone with quiet determination. Emma began her questioning gently, guiding Lucy through the events of the night once more. Each detail reinforced the evidence already presented, painting a clear and damning picture of Nathan's guilt. Then came the moment Emma had been waiting for. "Lucy," she said, her voice calm but pointed, "you told us yesterday that Nathan Hale said, 'No one will find out.' Do you remember when he said that?" Lucy nodded. "It was after he hurt my mom." Emma nodded encouragingly. "And what else did you hear him say?" Lucy hesitated, glancing toward Nathan. His icy stare met hers, and for a brief moment, her confidence wavered. But then she looked back at Emma, her hands tightening around the rabbit. "He said—" "She shouldn't have gotten involved," Lucy whispered. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "And then he said, 'It's your fault.'" The courtroom erupted in murmurs again, the weight of Lucy's words rippling through the room. Emma turned to the jury, her expression fierce. "Ladies and gentlemen, these aren't just the words of a frightened child. They're the confession of a man who thought he was above the law, a man who believed he could silence anyone who dared to stand in his way." Nathan's attorney stood, his voice sharp. "Objection. The defense is twisting words." Emma cut him off, her voice rising. "No, Mr. Hale twisted the truth. For years. And now, thanks to Lucy, we all see him for what he really is." The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. The jury's expressions were grim, their earlier doubts now replaced by anger and resolve. Nathan slumped in his chair, his attorney whispering frantically, but he didn't respond. His silence was as damning as the evidence itself. As court recessed for lunch, Emma pulled Lucy aside, kneeling to meet her gaze. "You were incredible up there," she said. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Lucy smiled faintly, her cheeks flushed with pride. I wanted people to know the truth." "They do," Emma said firmly, "because of you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucy's smile grew, reaching her eyes. It was a small victory, but in that moment, it felt monumental. They weren't finished yet, but the tide had turned. The truth, once buried, was now unstoppable. As the afternoon session began, the courtroom felt heavier than before. The evidence had shifted the trial's momentum, but Emma knew the final nail in Nathan Hale's coffin was still to come. She glanced at Lucy, who sat quietly beside her, her hands resting on the rabbit in her lap. Though she was only a child, she had become the cornerstone of the case, a living testament to courage in the face of fear. The judge called the court to order, his voice echoing through the room. "Ms. Carter, you may proceed with your final witness." Emma rose, her heart steady but her mind racing. This next step was critical. She turned to address the jury directly, her tone calm but impassioned. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the testimony of a brave little girl who stood up to someone she knew was dangerous. You've seen the evidence, recordings, timelines, and connections that all point to one undeniable truth. Nathan Hale abused his power to commit crimes and silence his victims." She walked slowly across the room, letting her words sink in. "But today I'd like to introduce one more piece of evidence, something that will leave no room for doubt." Emma gestured to the bailiff, who stepped forward with a sealed envelope. The room buzzed with curiosity as the bailiff handed the envelope to Emma. She held it up for the jury to see. "This," Emma began, "is a letter written by Lucy's mother found in her personal belongings after the attack. It was addressed to Lucy, meant to be given to her someday. It was never delivered because of what Nathan Hale did. But today, Lucy gets to hear her mother's words. Lucy's eyes widened, her small hands gripping the rabbit tightly. Emma crouched beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "Would you like me to read it?" she asked softly. Lucy nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes." Emma stood and carefully opened the envelope. She unfolded the letter, her hands steady despite the emotion rising in her chest. The paper was worn, the handwriting delicate but firm. "Dear Lucy," Emma began, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't be there to tell you myself. But I need you to know how much I love you. You are the bravest, kindest, and most beautiful person I've ever known. Never forget that." The room was silent, every eye fixed on Emma as she continued. "I've always believed in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And I know you have that same strength inside you. If anything happens to me, I want you to remember that it's not your fault. It's never your fault. You are my everything, Lucy. And I know you'll grow up to do amazing things. Stay brave, my love. Always." Emma paused, her voice faltering as she folded the letter and placed it gently on the defense table. She turned back to the jury, her voice firm once more. "This letter is a testament to the woman Nathan Hale tried to silence. But more than that, it's a testament to the strength of a little girl who refused to let her mother's memory be forgotten." She looked at Lucy, who was now crying silently, her small face buried in the rabbit's fur. Emma approached the jury box, her tone resolute. "Today, you have the power to ensure that Nathan Hale is held accountable. Not just for Lucy and her mother, but for every person he's hurt. The evidence is clear, the truth is undeniable, and justice demands that we act." The prosecutor's table was silent. Nathan's attorney slumped in his chair as if the weight of the evidence had finally crushed him. Nathan himself sat motionless, his face devoid of the bravado he had worn so confidently just days ago. The judge addressed the jury. "You have heard the evidence, the testimony, and the arguments. It is now your duty to deliberate and deliver a verdict. Court is adjourned until the jury reaches its decision." The gavel struck, and the courtroom emptied slowly. Emma stayed seated, her hand resting on Lucy's shoulder as they watched the jury file out. Lucy turned to her, her voice a whisper. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Emma crouched beside her, looking into her tear-streaked face. "I think they already do. You were incredible, Lucy. No one could hear your story and not believe you." Lucy nodded, her expression softening, though the fear in her eyes remained. "I just want it to be over." Emma hugged her gently, whispering, "It will be soon. You've done everything you could. Now it's their turn." Hours passed as the jury deliberated, the minutes stretching into what felt like an eternity. Lucy dozed off in Emma's lap, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. Emma stroked her hair absently, her own thoughts swirling. She had fought cases before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just about winning. It was about giving Lucy the life she deserved. Finally, the courtroom doors opened, and the jury returned. Emma gently woke Lucy, who sat up, clutching her rabbit tightly as they returned to their seats. The foreperson stood, the weight of the moment clear in their expression. The judge turned to the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, their voice steady. "We find the defendant, Nathan Hale, guilty on all counts." The room erupted, the sound of justice reverberating through every corner. Lucy's grip on Emma's hand tightened as tears streamed down her face, not of sadness but of relief. Emma knelt beside her, her own eyes glistening. "You did it," she whispered. "It's over." Lucy nodded, her small face lighting up with a smile that seemed to chase away every shadow. For the first time in months, she looked free. The courtroom buzzed with the aftershocks of the verdict, but for Emma and Lucy, the world felt still, as if time had paused just for them. Lucy clutched her rabbit tightly, her small shoulders trembling as relief washed over her. Emma knelt beside her, steadying the girl with a warm hand on her shoulder. "It's over," Emma said softly, her voice firm yet soothing. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." Lucy nodded, her wide eyes brimming with tears. "Do you think my mom knows?" Emma's throat tightened. She had faced hardened criminals, brutal cross-examinations, and endless late nights preparing for court. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. She managed a smile, her voice tender. "I think she knows. And I think she's so proud of you." Lucy's lips trembled, and without another word, she leaned forward and hugged Emma tightly. It was a gesture filled with gratitude, relief, and the kind of trust Emma had spent the entire trial earning. For a moment, Emma held her, feeling the weight of everything they had fought for finally lift. As the courtroom emptied, Detective Rivera approached, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and determination. He nodded at Emma before crouching slightly to address Lucy directly. "You were incredible in there, Lucy," he said gently. "You helped a lot of people today." Lucy looked at him shyly, her rabbit still clutched in one hand. "Will he stay in jail?" Rivera's face softened, and he exchanged a glance with Emma. "He's going to prison, Lucy, and we're going to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone ever again." Lucy's grip on her rabbit loosened, just slightly, her small face brightening. For the first time, she seemed to believe it. Rivera straightened, addressing Emma. "With the evidence from the recording and the jury's verdict, we're going to open up more investigations. Hale's been covering his tracks for years. This trial might be over, but we've got a long road ahead." Emma nodded, her expression resolute. "Let me know how I can help. I'm not letting him get away with anything." Rivera gave her a small smile. "You've done more than enough. You and Lucy deserve a break." Later that evening, Emma and Lucy found themselves in a quiet park, away from the noise and chaos of the courthouse. The cool air carried the faint scent of flowers, and the soft hum of crickets filled the silence. Emma had brought Lucy here for one reason: closure. The two of them stood before a small memorial bench under a large oak tree. On the bench was a simple plaque that read, "In loving memory of Sarah Taylor, a woman of strength and courage." Lucy stared at the plaque, her small frame still. Emma knelt beside her, her voice gentle. "Your mom was so brave, Lucy, and she would be so proud of everything you did." Lucy stepped closer to the bench, placing her rabbit carefully on the seat. For a moment, she didn't speak, her small hands clasped in front of her. "Mom," she whispered finally, her voice quivering. "I hope you're watching. I did what you told me to do. I stayed brave, and I made them listen." Emma's eyes stung with tears, but she stayed silent, letting Lucy have this moment. The little girl stepped back, her face a mixture of sadness and peace. She turned to Emma and smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "I think she's happy now," Lucy said softly. Emma smiled back, her chest tightening. "I think so, too." That night, as they drove home, Lucy leaned against the car window, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but her face calm. Emma glanced at her through the rearview mirror, her own heart swelling with pride and relief. The fight had been long and grueling, but they had won. Justice had been served, and more importantly, Lucy had found her voice. As the city lights blurred past, Lucy spoke quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "Emma." "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think we can visit her again? At the bench?" Emma's throat tightened, and she nodded. "Of course we can, anytime you want." Lucy smiled faintly, her eyes closing as she leaned into the warmth of her seat. "Thank you," she murmured, drifting off to sleep. Emma's grip on the steering wheel tightened, a wave of emotion washing over her. She had started this journey fighting for justice, but along the way, she had found something deeper, a bond with a little girl who had reminded her of the strength it took to never give up. The road ahead wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt hope. A hope that was as steady and unyielding as the little girl who had stood up in court and pointed at the truth. The next morning brought a new sense of quiet in Emma's small apartment. The tension that had weighed on them for weeks had lifted, replaced by a calm that felt almost foreign. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden light on the breakfast table where Emma sat with Lucy. The little girl picked at a plate of pancakes, her appetite not yet returned, but her expression was lighter, more relaxed. Emma watched her for a moment, noting the change. The dark circles under Lucy's eyes had begun to fade, and though she still held her rabbit tightly, her grip was more casual now, less like a lifeline and more like a companion. "Not hungry?" Emma asked gently, breaking the silence. Lucy shrugged, poking at the pancake with her fork. "A little. I keep thinking about Mom." Emma leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "That's okay, Lucy. It's good to think about her. She'd want you to." Lucy glanced up, her small face thoughtful. "Do you think she was scared? You know, when it happened?" Emma's chest tightened, but she didn't look away. "I think your mom was very brave. She wasn't thinking about herself, she was thinking about you. That's what moms do. They put their kids first, no matter what." Lucy nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate. "I wish I could talk to her. Just one more time." Emma reached across the table and placed a hand over Lucy's. "You can always talk to her, Lucy. She may not be here, but she'll always be listening. You can tell her anything." For a moment, Lucy's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but then she smiled. A small, brave smile that reminded Emma of how far they had come. Later that afternoon, Emma and Lucy visited the park again, the same quiet space where Lucy's mother's memorial bench stood beneath the sprawling oak tree. The air was crisp, the scent of fresh-cut grass mingling with the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. Lucy walked ahead, her small frame illuminated by the sunlight breaking through the branches. She carried her rabbit in one hand, the other trailing along the back of the bench as she approached it. Emma followed closely, giving her space but staying near enough to offer support. Lucy sat on the bench, setting her rabbit beside her. She stared at the plaque, her gaze steady and contemplative. For a long moment she didn't speak, and Emma stayed silent, letting Lucy take the lead. Finally, Lucy broke the silence, her voice soft but clear. "Hi, Mom," she said, her words carrying a mixture of sadness and hope. "It's me. I wanted to tell you that. I did it. I was brave, just like you said I should be." Her hands rested on her lap, her small fingers twisting together. "I told them everything. I made them listen. He can't hurt anyone anymore. Not me, not you, not anyone." Emma's throat tightened as she watched the little girl pour her heart out, speaking words that no child should ever have to say. Lucy's voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "I miss you every day. I miss the way you'd read to me before bed and how you always made me feel safe. I wish you were here now, but I know you're watching. And I promise, I'll keep being brave. For you." A tear slipped down Lucy's cheek, but she brushed it away quickly, glancing toward Emma as if to see if she was watching. Emma smiled, her own eyes misty. "You're doing great, Lucy," she said softly. "Keep going." Lucy turned back to the plaque, her expression serious. "I'm going to be okay, Mom. Emma's helping me. She's kind of like a guardian angel, and I know you sent her to me. I'll always remember what you taught me. Always." Her words hung in the air, carried by the gentle rustle of the leaves above them. Lucy sat back, exhaling deeply, as if releasing the weight she had carried for so long. She reached for her rabbit, hugging it to her chest as she leaned back on the bench. Emma finally sat beside her, her voice soft. "You were amazing, Lucy. Your mom would be so proud of you." Lucy looked up at her, a small smile spreading across her face. "Do you think so?" "I know so," Emma said, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "You've been through so much, and you never gave up. That's the kind of strength your mom wanted you to have." They sat together for a while, the silence between them warm and comforting. The world seemed quieter here, the noise of the city and the chaos of the courtroom far away. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucy's heart felt light. That evening, as they returned home, Emma tucked Lucy into bed. The little girl looked up at her, her rabbit nestled beside her on the pillow. "Emma," she said, her voice small. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think I'll ever stop missing her?" Emma sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Lucy's forehead. "No, Lucy, you won't. But missing her doesn't mean you can't be happy. It just means she was someone very special, and she'll always be a part of you." Lucy thought about that for a moment, her eyes drifting closed. "I like that," she murmured. "She's still with me." "She always will be," Emma said softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Good night, Lucy." "Good night," Lucy whispered, her breathing evening out as sleep took her. Emma stood by the door for a moment watching her. The little girl who had faced so much now slept peacefully, her expression serene. Emma's heart swelled with pride and love, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace too. As she turned off the light and closed the door, Emma made a silent vow. She would protect Lucy, guide her, and ensure that the life they had fought so hard to reclaim was filled with joy and hope. They had both lost so much, but together they were finding their way back to the light. The days that followed were quieter, but they were filled with a sense of new beginnings. Lucy slowly settled into a routine with Emma, each day feeling less like survival and more like living. Emma found joy in the little things, watching Lucy draw pictures at the kitchen table, hearing her giggle at silly cartoons, and seeing her gradually open up to a world that had once seemed too overwhelming. One afternoon, Emma received a call from Detective Rivera. His voice was steady, but there was a sense of urgency beneath it. "We've uncovered more, Emma," Rivera said. "Nathan Hale's crimes run deeper than we thought. He wasn't just involved in this case. There are at least 3 others tied to his corruption. He manipulated evidence, coerced witnesses, and even had ties to organized crime." Emma's grip on the phone tightened. "Will this lead to more charges?" "Absolutely," Rivera replied. "We're building a larger case against him, but I thought you should know. Lucy's testimony was the key that unlocked all of this. Without her, we wouldn't have been able to start digging." Emma felt a surge of pride and sadness. She's been through so much already. I don't want her dragged back into it. "She won't need to be," Rivera assured her. "You've done more than enough. But I wanted you to know how important her bravery was. She changed everything." That evening, Emma shared the news with Lucy as they sat in the living room. Lucy listened quietly, her rabbit perched on her lap. "So, because of me, they're stopping him from hurting anyone else?" Lucy asked. Emma nodded. "That's right. What you did helped so many people, Lucy. You didn't just stand up for your mom. You stood up for everyone he tried to hurt." Lucy tilted her head thoughtfully. "Does that mean I'm like a superhero?" Emma smiled, her heart swelling. "Exactly like a superhero." Lucy beamed at that, her small chest puffing with pride. "Mom would have liked that," she said softly. "She would have loved it," Emma said, pulling Lucy into a hug. "She'd be so proud of the person you are." The next weekend, Emma and Lucy returned to the park, this time with a bouquet of Lucy's favorite flowers, bright yellow daisies. They placed the flowers on the memorial bench, the sunlight glinting through the leaves overhead. "Hi, Mom," Lucy said, her voice steady. "I just wanted to tell you I'm okay, and I'm going to be okay. I miss you every day, but Emma's helping me. And I'm going to keep being brave, just like you said." Emma stood a few steps back, giving Lucy her space. Watching her, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the justice they had found, but for the connection they had forged in the process. Lucy had become more than her client. She was family. As they walked back to the car, Lucy slipped her hand into Emma's. "Do you think I can be a lawyer someday, like you?" Emma glanced down, her heart skipping a beat. "I think you'd make an amazing lawyer, Lucy, but only if you want to." Lucy nodded thoughtfully. "I do. I want to help people, like you helped me." Tears stung Emma's eyes, but she blinked them back, smiling. "Then that's exactly what you'll do." Months passed, and life began to feel normal again. Lucy started school, where she made friends who didn't know her as the girl from the courtroom, but simply as Lucy, a kind, bright, and creative little girl. Emma continued her work, taking on cases with renewed purpose, her fight for justice now fueled by a deeply personal passion. One evening, as Emma tucked Lucy into bed, Lucy looked up at her with a question in her eyes. "Emma, do you think Mom knows about everything we did? About what happened?" Emma smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Lucy's forehead. "I know she does, and I know she's smiling right now because of how brave you've been." Lucy smiled sleepily. "I'm glad I have you. You're like my hero, too." Emma's throat tightened, and she leaned down to kiss Lucy's forehead. "And you're mine," she whispered. As Lucy drifted off to sleep, Emma sat beside her for a moment, watching her peaceful face. The journey they had been on was long and painful, but it had brought them here, to this moment of safety, love, and hope. Emma stood and turned off the light, a small, satisfied smile on her face. As she closed the door behind her, she realized that their story wasn't just one of survival. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable bond that could form even in the darkest of times. Together, they had found their way forward, and together they would continue to face whatever came next, knowing they had each other. The journey of Emma and Lucy was one of courage, resilience, and transformation, woven together by shared loss and an unwavering pursuit of justice. Through their shared fight, they revealed truths that not only brought a dangerous man to justice, but also highlighted the power of standing up against injustice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. For Lucy, the journey was not just about testifying in court or pointing her small hand at the man who had shattered her world. It was about finding her voice in the face of fear and discovering that her bravery could shine brighter than her pain. Her mother's words, planted deep within her heart, became her guiding light. "Be brave even when it's hard." Those words carried her through moments of doubt, helping her stand tall and become a symbol of hope, not only for herself but for others who had suffered in silence. Emma, too, experienced a profound transformation. Initially, she had taken Lucy's case out of duty, her professional instinct driving her to seek justice. But as the trial unfolded, and the bond between them deepened, Emma realized that Lucy wasn't just a client, she was a reminder of why Emma had chosen this path in the first place. Lucy's courage reignited Emma's purpose, reminding her that justice was not just a concept, it was a lifeline for those who needed it most. Through Lucy, Emma found her own redemption, healing wounds she had carried for years and fulfilling a promise she had made to herself long ago. The courtroom victory was more than a legal triumph. It was a declaration that truth could prevail even when it seemed buried beneath power and lies. Nathan Hale's fall from grace sent a powerful message. No one is above accountability, and those who misuse their authority will eventually face the consequences. Lucy's bravery, captured in her words and her unwavering testimony, became the catalyst for a broader reckoning, ensuring that Hale's crimes would no longer remain hidden. But perhaps the greatest lesson of all was the enduring strength of love and connection. Lucy's journey showed that even in the wake of profound loss, hope could still take root. Her bond with Emma, forged through trust and shared determination, became a source of healing for them both. It was proof that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, fight for you, and remind you of your worth. The story of Lucy and Emma teaches us that bravery doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means facing it anyway. It shows us the power of speaking up, even when our voices tremble, and the importance of holding on to the values of truth and justice, no matter the obstacles. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found in human connection, and the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to give up. As Lucy continued to grow, her mother's legacy became her foundation, and Emma's support became her strength. Together, they faced the future not as victims, but as survivors, each one stronger because of the other. Their story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a reminder that, in the face of unimaginable pain, It is love, courage, and truth that ultimately prevail.